Hi friends, welcome back. Let's take a quick look at an intro to editing and how we're going to fix all the errors in this song. In order to work, we need to make sure that we've got our checklist set for all of our tools here at the top of the screen like we've talked about in class. So let's run across those again real quick. If you Command Tab over to where you've got your instructions open, you'll have your checklist, and I'm just going to run through it on the other window. So over here, we need to have our grid mode selected. So absolute grid, definitely not relative grid. So it'll be blue instead of purple. Make sure that your smart tool is selected by clicking the bar across the top here. Going to make sure our tab to transients, link timeline and edit selection, and link track edit selection are on. Come to your bars and beats counter and make sure it's set to bars and beats on your main counter. Your grid lines, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit, Command right bracket, and Control Alt up arrow to make things a little bit taller. These grid lines are going to show us where we are actually going to be editing. So with the grid lines turned off, we're still in grid mode, so you'll notice things still snap to the grid, but we can't see them. So I like to have those grid lines turned on. We should be set to eighth note. Our nudge value, I think, is 10 milliseconds. Pre and post roll should be on and set to 1 bar. Notice if you've got that wrong, I'm going to set that to 1 bar. Delete 1 bar, and you have to hit enter to save it. Count off should be on and set to 1 bar. And this is worth triple checking. The tempo. The conductor track should be on, and the tempo track, according to our instructions for this project, need to be set to 110 beats per minute. So we see that right here at the bottom, tempo 110. Okay, so the next thing we got to in our project was to fix these 10 performance errors. So if we've got all those things in place, assuming your tempo is correct, then what I've done, if I zoom out a little bit here, Alt-A, is I've gone ahead and I've made a memory location for every one of the errors that happens. And I do that specifically because not everybody coming into this class has a lot of musical background. Now, I will say this, if you don't have a lot of musical background, it's pretty critical if you want to edit or work with music for a living. No ability to read music or theory or play an instrument. If you don't have any ability in that regard, it's very difficult to tell if a track is out of time or pitch. So it's definitely something you're going to invest some time in. But for now, I've gone ahead and put memory locations to get us to each of where the errors occurs. And then it's going to be up to you to figure out exactly where it is and how you want to fix it. But I'm going to show you a way for all 10 of these errors. So if you can't see your memory locations window, go to your window menu and turn that on. Memory locations can also be accessed with Command and the number pad 5. That's what these little arrow or these little boxes with the rounded box around the 5 is. It lets you know that that's only on the number pad. So Command 5 turns on and off our memory location right here. All right, so I'm going to open this up and just set it down to the side. And I'm going to come over to my drums and let's zoom in and get ready to go. All right, so if you want to be able to control your own music, if you want to hear something in your head, and maybe you have played the part or you've had a friend play the part, and you hear it and you go, I like it, but I wish it was a little earlier or later, or maybe they hit the wrong notes. We have to be able to go in and quickly select the piece that doesn't work, either delete it, and then copy and paste a good note over the top of that. That's typically the quickest solution. Sometimes it involves moving the note that you wanted, and we'll look at that too. But let's go ahead and look at the basics. According to the instructions, it says we need to fix these 10 performance errors noted in the memory locations. We've already established that these are those errors. Now, we need to group the drums to fix them first. And here's why. With our drums, let's come and make sure that none of our tracks are selected. So if any of them, or if they're all selected, you can simply hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the names. That's going to deselect any of the tracks. Now we need to group the drums. And here's why. If I zoom in on these drums, and I notice this first drum error here about bar 6.2 or bar 6 beat 2. If I hit play and listen to it, we see and hear that this snare drum here is early. Now, if I were to go and actually just edit that drum out and move it to the right time, here's the problem. You can still hear this old drum beat up. In other words, this old snare drum, because it was played in the wrong time, you're going to hear both now. Listen to it. So you hear the old snare drum caught up here and then the fixed one there. So that's not going to work. So anytime we're editing instruments that have multiple microphones on a single instrument, like drums, maybe a stereo mic'd guitar or a stereo mic'd or multi-mic'd piano, we want to group them first. So in order to do that, I'm going to come over, I'm going to click on the name of the first track, like the kick drum, hold down Shift and select that last overhead. That's going to select the entire range of drums ready to be grouped. So now to group them, if you had to guess, group would be Command G. Command G is going to group this. And I'm going to go ahead and name this drums, D-R-U-M-S. Now you notice a few things in here. It shows us we could add or subtract to this group. But if I'm making a drum group, I only want drums in it. So make sure you've got your kick, snare top and bottom, overheads, and we'll be good to go. You can choose other attributes, which we'll go into later in the class, like whether you want them to all solo when you solo one or mute when you mute them, but we'll leave that alone for now and hit OK or the Enter key. Now notice, with your group turned on down here in the bottom, if I click and make a selection, it affects all of the tracks or all of the drum tracks in the group. So I can make that drum group, select it, and now we're good to go. If I ever need to turn this group on and off, you click on the name of the group down here in the corner. So clicking on the name of the group turns it off, and that would enable me to select and affect just one track. Not very often I need to do that, but it does happen on occasion. So if you need to turn those drum groups off, you can do that. Oops, undo. And if I turn them back on, now I can select and affect all of the drums. So that's dealing with your drum group. If you ever screw it up, you can come down and right click on it, and you could either delete the group or modify it. Maybe if you accidentally added the bass into your drum group and you said, how did I do that? You can click on bass and remove it. Okay, let's take a look at the edit. All right, last thing. Let's make sure that we can navigate quickly around our session so that we can get to where we want to go. I'm going to bear claw and the down arrow and then Alt, hold down the Alt or Option key and tap A. So Alt A like we've talked about in class. To navigate around inside of Pro Tools, I like to use the number pad on the right-hand side. Of course, you can also just click up here in the bars and beats ruler, which will take you to someplace, but the danger of that is that now it has selected across all the tracks. I could also simply click with my selector tool any place else, and because I have my options set correctly, it'll also change my playback to right there. You'll also notice with pre-roll turned on that if I click someplace or go, for example, to bar 20, that when I hit play, it's actually starting from bar 19 because I have a pre-roll set to 1 bar. So it's going to start playing 1 bar before where I go. So let's navigate real quickly using our number pad, and let's practice, for example, jumping to the beginning of the song with the return key. Return returns us to the beginning. If I wanted to jump to bar 15, I can hit asterisk, 1, 5, and the Enter key on my number pad. You'll notice the asterisk key puts our selector right up here in our main counter. Double check if you haven't checked already that this is set to bars and beats, because otherwise, if you were on minutes and seconds, asterisk 1, 5 will take you to 15 minutes. Probably not what you want. Bars and beats, asterisk 1, 5. There we are. Let's practice that real quick and jump around a few places. Asterisk, bar 20, enter. Takes me there. Asterisk, bar 3, enter. Takes me there. So asterisk, 4, enter. You're getting the idea. So now we need to be able to jump around quickly and make a few other adjustments. For example, if I wanted to zoom in now and find this first drum error, it's going to be located here somewhere near bar 6. Let's practice our shortcuts. Control Alt, up arrow, and let's make these tracks a little bit taller so we're ready to work on them. All right, so now that we're going to start by fixing these 3 drum errors, let's make sure that we can see our drums. And when I'm going to work on a track specifically, especially if I have a bunch of other tracks kind of taking up space, I like to come over to my tracks window on the side and click and just drag down. So I'm clicking and swiping, essentially holding down my mouse to swipe over those so that the excess tracks go away. I don't need them all in my way when I'm trying to edit. Then I can use my bear claw, Control, Alt, and Command, down arrow, and that's going to fit them on the screen. I'm going to zoom in here, Command right bracket and zoom in, and that's going to get us close enough to see our track. I like to look at this bars and beats ruler and just get to where I can see about maybe 2 or 3 bars. I like to think of it, this is the 1 beat resolution, and you can see why here, because right now in bar 4, beat 1, 2, 3, 4, I can see individual beats on here. If I zoom out, I'm at about the half note resolution. You see bar 4 and bar 5 with 1 line in the middle. If I zoom out even farther, I tend to think of this as the 1 bar resolution. bar 7, bar 8. So if I'm trying to make very small edits or edits to just one beat, being zoomed out at the bar level like this is going to be too far out. It's going to be difficult to click and grab exactly the note that's missing. So let's use our command right bracket and zoom in to where we're at about the 1 beat resolution, where I can see individual bar 5 beat 1, bar 6, etc. If that makes sense. And now I've left my bass on here just so I can see it, and I can kind of reference that. But the other thing is I want to turn my drums up a little bit so I can hear these. And we can do this in the mix window, which we might have talked about. It's just another window under the window menu, and it's toggled to by command equals. So go ahead and pause for a second and hit that command equals a few times and practice getting back and forth to that. But the better way, rather than popping all the way over here and turning up our drums, which is not bad, in command equals, you can actually do it from here in the edit window. So right here where you see this volume, pan, these can actually be clicked on and you'll get a little fader. So if I am listening to these drums and I like where they're at, I might want to turn them up a little bit. I'm going to click on this and just turn them up. And you can see because they're grouped, what's happening? They're all adjusting at the same time. Nice. If I want them less, I can click and turn them down. So I'm going to click in that volume and make sure they're loud enough for me to hear. And there's our drums going away. And so let's start to go through our steps for editing. First, these are going to apply when we've checked everything else. So make sure you've gone through those previous few steps. But the simple steps to editing and fixing the bad notes is to find a good one. So step 1, we're going to identify the error and what bar and beat it happens at by looking here at the bars and beats ruler. Then we're going to find a good note or a better version of that note and its bar and beat. Oftentimes, if it's pop music or something very simple and repetitive, you're going to find that best note 4 bars earlier or 4 bars later. So if a note goes wrong, for example, at bar 10, oftentimes if it's simply a repeating phrase in the song, you might find the right note at bar 14 or at bar 6, if that makes sense. Because a lot of times pop songs are arranged in 4, 8, or 12 bar sections. The other possibility is if you've got something that goes wrong in the first note of chorus 1, where might you find that? In the first note of chorus 2, most likely. Now, that's just a good rule of thumb. Sometimes it won't work that way, and we have to actually look around and find the good note in other parts of the song. But typically, 4 bars ahead or behind, or in another verse or chorus at the same spot. Then we're going to select and copy the good notes, paste them over the bad notes, listen to it to make sure that we got the right note in, and then we're going to add small crossfades before and after the edit. And we're going to hide those fades in either silent areas or before the transient, this loud front part of the note. And then after we've done that for this project, you're going to color that edit purple so we can see it and work from there. Ready to go? Here we go. All right, so for our first thing, let's go ahead and take a look at editing drums because I find that a lot of times they're the simplest approach to introduce editing. So we could start with any of these. I see drum, I see a bass error, I see something on the hook guitar has an error here. Let's start with this drum, and I can see that I've placed this marker here somewhere around bar 6. You can see that here at the in the counter. And so if I just hit play, you'll notice pre-roll is going to cause playback to start actually a bar before my playhead. It's going to start over here where this little yellow flag is. So if I hit play and I listen, I'm going to hear this snare drum obviously is going to be off time. Okay. And so since I'm zoomed to an appropriate level like we looked at here, let's go ahead and zoom out one more level to where I'm seeing what I would think of as the half note resolution. So bar 5, a half note, bar 6. So if you see that up there. Now, since we've identified the error happens in bar 6, typically the easiest way to do this is to simply select a similar bar or something that sounds the same note or same pattern, and we're going to copy and paste it. Exactly the same as if you had a document open. Let's say that I had this word right here, and I wanted the word purple twice. I could simply select the word purple, copy it, come over to the next word, select that, and paste, right? That's essentially all we're doing. So I'm going to come in here. I need to be careful about where I place my mouse, but if I click inside my drum tracks, click and select over this entire bar, I'm going to double check a couple things. One, I want to make sure that it's starting at bar 5, and I see that right here, bar 5, and it's ending at bar 6. So I've selected exactly one bar. If I select it early, I would see that it doesn't line up with bar 5 and bar 6 right here. So I want to make sure I'm zoomed to a level where I can see this, again using R and T or Command left and Command right bracket. I'm going to click here at bar 5 and select all the way over to bar 6. Now even though we only had the one note that got messed up, let's go ahead and just copy this, Command C to copy, and now I'm going to go to bar 6. So I can either do that by clicking here at bar 6 and pasting it in place, Command V. So I selected bar 5, I copied, I selected at bar 6, and I pasted. Well, now that we've done this, you see that I've got to deal with the challenge of all these different icons or these different tools popping up depending on where I move my mouse. Does everybody see that? So I've now pasted this, I pasted it in, it's going to look like this, and since my pre-roll is still selected, all I have to do is hit play. And you see that as it played through, if I were to undo, you see there's the old note. If I were to redo, Shift Command Z, there's the new note. So it sounds like that's in the correct place. So according to our instructions, we identified the error in bar 6, and it's bar and beat. We identified the good notes, or a similar pattern, in bar 5, and then we selected and copied the good notes, bar 5, and we pasted it over the bad, bar 6. Now we need to add small crossfades before and after the edit. So I need to zoom in. Let's use the T key to zoom in. And I see that this error is happening inside the middle of this one note because he was a little early. He started actually before bar 6. So I see that on both sides. What I want to do is I need to trim this edit to where it happens either place the fades in either silent areas or right before the transient. Well, there's no real silent area in drums, but the closest thing we have is right here before the loud part of this note. So I'm going to trim this back, and as I go to trim it, you'll notice what happens. It's snapping to that previous eighth note because I'm in grid mode. So since it's snapping to that previous eighth note, I actually need to get into slip mode. So the grid, when we're in grid mode over here in the corner, that makes us adhere to whatever this grid value is that we've assigned. In this case though, if I wanted to be in slip mode, if I clicked on that, that's going to let me trim this wherever I want. You see it'll go to any sample between any grid value. It's just going to ignore the grid entirely. Here's what I do though. I leave it in grid mode all the time because my left thumb, secret weapon, is sitting on the command key. So with the command key held down, I can actually get slip mode without having to go up and click a button. So by holding down the command key now where my thumb is already sitting, I can trim this until that edit is right before that transient. Now you see that these two notes are not in the same place. I'm going to trim it right before that transient so it's in a silent area. So I'm going to do that to both sides. Hold the command key down again and trim to the left. Now look at my icon here because you need to know which way it's pointing. If I were to click this now and just trim it back, notice how it's pointing to the left because it's going to trim off the end of the clip. So if I click and I trim, it's just going to leave a gap there. What I want to do is point it to where it's on this side because I'm going to trim this way. I want to trim this piece of audio this way before the transient. Of course, if I trim it without command held down, it's snapping to the grid. So hold my command key down and it's going to let me trim right here into this silent area. Now, since that is done, it looks like these edits happen in a nice quiet place. I can hit play. And it sounds good. Now the one thing is I do need to come in and make these crossfades. So let's zoom in with our selection mate. I'm going to click with my grabber tool on my clip. I'm going to zoom in with the T key and it zooms me in close. Now if I were to blow this up, what you're going to notice is that this edit is happening and there is still sound happening there. It's really quiet, but that sound is still happening. And all I've done is artificially zoom them up so I can see that. So what I want to do is make this little crossfade. And to do that, I simply hover over the bottom of the waveform between the two clips. And by hovering over the bottom right there, I see this little tiny crossfade tool. It looks like a fade with an X in it. And so if I were to try to click and drag, you'll notice it snaps to the grid by default. And it's going to make a fade that's too big. Even if I zoom back, you can see that this is too big. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z, and hold down which key? You got it, the command key. Hold that thumb on the command key, and now I get slip mode, so I can make a tiny little slip edit and make this fade as big as I want. How big do I want it? Not big at all. In fact, I'm going to make it as small as I can anytime I'm fading between two sounds. So that'll hopefully make it transition without being able to hear it. Let's just hit play and hear. flawless. Flew right through. So I'm going to zoom out with the R key. I'm going to scroll over with my little scroll wheel. Come to this side where I've already got my edit. Go straight to the bottom. Get my crossfade tool. Hold the Command key down. Click and trim. And that's going to get that little fade done as well. So once I've done that, that's looking good. That first edit is done. So let's select this now. I'm going to use my grabber tool over the bottom half. Click it. Let's open up our color palette. You can, of course, use the color window, or I prefer to go over to the little color swatch on the side and double click it. We need to color this selected clip, which we can select either by clicking twice over the top of it with our selector tool, or by hovering over the bottom and clicking once with our grabber. If we double click, it's going to try to make us rename it. So here we go. We need to color this clip in the track purple. So make sure you've selected clip and track, and there we go. And once we've done that according to the instructions and it sounds good, boom. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this extra marker here so that I know I've gotten that taken care of. Click, and you can either drag it up or down, and you'll see it turns into a little trash can. I can also hold the Alt key down and click on this, and that will delete it. Any of the above. And now we're ready to move on to the next one. Okay, so since we've done that one, let's go ahead and hit Alt-A to zoom out, and let's jump over to the next one, which I see happening here around bar 18. Now I'm going to move through these steps just slightly faster. I'm going to zoom out to where I'm at the half note resolution. So again, I'm using T to zoom towards, R to zoom out. I'm zooming out until I see this bar 16, bar 17, with at least a half note in between. So I can see, I feel like this is close enough to see my audio. So I zoom to this level. I want to be careful to click inside my drums, not in the bars and beats ruler, because that would accidentally copy and paste the bass as well. So here we go. Let's see if we can find this drum error. I'm going to click and play, and let's go through our steps of identify the error and its bar and beat, identify the good note, which is often 4 bars ahead or behind. I'd say the exception to this is drums, where sometimes you can just find it right next to it, because drums are a lot of times a repeating pattern. Select and copy good, paste over the bad, etc. So here we go. Back at bar 18, hit play. And I hear and see this late snare drum right here. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach. Since bar 17, or bar 18 is where it goes bad, bar 17 sounds really similar. I'm simply going to come to bar 17 and select, copy, click at 18, paste. So I've copied, I selected bar 17, copied, I selected at bar 18, and pasted. Let's listen to it. And they sound good except for those clicks and pops at the beginning. Use the T key to zoom towards your audio. I'm going to go to trim it back, realize that I need to be in slip mode, so I hold my Command key down. I'm going to trim to either silence or before the transient and let go. Scroll over here, maybe zoom out one level, hold the Command key down, trim before silence or the transient, come to the beginning, to go to the bottom of the clip. Since they're all grouped, it's going to fade every one. Hold the Command key down so I have my slip mode again. I'm going to make the smallest little crossfade I can. Come over here, click, and make the smallest little crossfade I can. Select it with the grabber tool and listen. Great. Let's go ahead and open up our color palette and color that clip purple. And throw away our edit. I'm going to zoom out and scroll over to the last one, show you one last technique here. Let's find and identify our error. Okay, so we have a late snare drum there as well in bar 24. I'm going to go to bar 23 and see if it sounds the same. Bar 23 does have a crash in the middle of it. If I were to copy and paste that, copy 23, select 24 and paste. It's not bad. We may want to select that from a different bar like 22. I'm going to leave it for now and zoom in. Zoom in just close enough that I can see all my audio. Hold the Command key down, trim to silence or the transient before the transient. Holding the Command key down still. Go to the bottom, holding the Command key so I can get as small a fade as I want. And trim. Select it with my grabber and listen. That works. Open up my color palette and color that. Oh, not the track. Tracks need to be red. Color the clips in the tracks purple. Great. Go ahead and throw away that. And let's go ahead and zoom out, bear claw down, Alt A, and I've fixed those 3 drum edits. Ready to move on and take a look at the rest. All right, now it's time to take a look at the bass guitar errors. We have several of those according to our memory locations window. And again, if you're missing that, you can look under window and find memory locations, or use command and the number pad 5. These little boxes around the 5 indicate that only works with the number pad. So it wouldn't work with command and the 5 on the top of your keyboard. AKA if you're on a laptop, you got to come to the window to do this. So command number pad 5 brings up our memory locations. Let's click on bass guitar 1 and zoom in. Now I've already got it visible here, but I'm going to turn down my drums. Same as last time. I'm going to come to my drum track, click on this volume, and just bring it down, and then go to the bass guitar, and let's turn it up. Now, when listening to something or trying to work on something like a bass guitar, especially in headphones where you might not have a lot of low end, it's a little tricky to hear. And if I just crank it up, possible that, sometimes I'm still not hearing it as well as I could. So on that occasion, I'm going to come over, quickly click and swipe down. Holding down my mouse, I can click and swipe to turn on all these other tracks. Use Command equals to flip over to the mix window. And I'm just going to go through and quickly turn down these other things a little bit that might be making it harder for me to hear this vocal, or not hear this vocal, but hear this bass. So I'm just going to turn these down a little bit, especially these hook vocals. They're really kind of getting in the way. And the vocal track, the lead vocal, actually makes it a little bit difficult for me to hear as well. Hear some of these errors. So if I pull these all down, maybe even pull down the acoustic a little bit. Let's listen to it now. Much more bass-centric mix. Now we'll turn all these up later, but for now we've at least rebalanced things so that we can hear the bass a little bit better. Now if I hit bear claw down, all of a sudden I'm dealing with way too many tracks. It's very difficult to get my mouse in the tool I want. So again, I'm going to come over here, click and swipe and turn these off, or at least hide them. While we're at it, I'm going to go ahead and hide these drums and bear claw down. So I've got a nice tall bass. Let's zoom in with the T key, and I'm going to zoom again to this half note resolution. So bar 3, bar 4, bar 5 right here. I can see them all with that half note in between. That's probably going to be good enough. We might occasionally zoom in one step closer or zoom out a little bit farther. That's okay, but this is a good place to start. So we see that our memory location has an error right here somewhere in bar 5. Let's listen and see if we can find it. I'm going to click here. My pre-roll is going to start me a bar early, and that's good to go. So clearly in the beginning of bar 5, it screws up. Now here's the secret to editing music quickly and easily. We've already learned how to do it with our mouse. So that's one way we could do it. We could simply try to find a good note and paste it over the bad. But let me show you the way that this works, especially in pop music, any sort of repetitive pop, rock, country. A lot of times it works in 4-bar phrases. So for example, if we listen to this phrase back here starting at bar 4, we'll hear that this is basically, this whole song repeats for 4 bars. So when I hit play, bum, 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 second bar of the phrase is screwed up, third bar of the phrase, and then it starts over. The first bar of the phrase at bar 8, second bar of the phrase at bar 9. Oh, second bass error. The third bar is missing. Fourth bar is missing. It starts over. Starts over. Starts over. Third bar. The fourth bar. So what we find with that is a lot of times, especially in repeating music, and if for whatever reason you can't simply pick out the pitch, maybe you haven't practiced or learned perfect pitch or music theory, a lot of times, for example, if bar 4 is the first bar of the phrase, we'll see those notes repeated where? 4 bars later. So bar 4's notes, if I turn off my pre-roll so we can just hear it directly, and I go to bar 8, while he's playing different patterns, it's the same notes. So of course, if you can ideally put in the exact same patterns, that's a bit more advanced editing. But for now, we're just going to try to focus on the notes. So if I look at bar 4, it's the same notes I'll find at bar 8, and the same notes I'll find at bar 12. Right? Now, bass players in the audience might, want us to keep that exact part, but in this case, listening to it, it's more of an amateur sounding performance. It doesn't have a ton of, repetitive stuff. So let's go ahead and fix this note. So the simple way to think of that is, if I'm listening to this track now and I play bar 4 and hear bar 4 is good and bar 5 is bad, If I know I could grab bar 4 from bar 8, I know I can find the notes for bar 5 where? In bar 9, or conceivably even bar 13, right? So if we're looking 4 bars later, it's at bar 9, 4 bars later, it's at bar 13. So let's hear what goes wrong in bar 5, bar 9, bar 13. Both of which are the correct notes. So I'm just going to steal them from bar 13 since we're already here. If I zoom in one more level so I can make sure I'm clicking at the right place, I'm going to click, select over my bass guitar. Again, I'm clicking in the bass guitar track, copy, Command C. And let's use a shortcut that we learned in class, or hopefully you've learned in class, because what you're getting probably tired of is a lot of this clicking and dragging. I've clicked, I've selected here at bar 13. And I can even double check up here, again, that I've identified the bad note, bar 5. I identified the good note, bar 13. I've selected it and make sure I'm going to copy. But the faster way, rather than having to always come back and click at bar 5, is to use the number pad to navigate around like we learned earlier. So in this case, I want to go to bar 5. I can do that on my number pad like we looked at with the asterisk key. So when I hit the asterisk key, we see that our number, our main counter gets selected. So by hitting the asterisk key on my number pad, or simply clicking up here, and then clicking 5 and enter, you see that it pops me right back to bar 5. And since I know that that's where I needed to paste, I can simply hit Command V. Command V pastes it right in. Now with my pre-roll turned on, which you can turn on and off either by clicking on these or Command K. Command K will turn these on and off. I can just paste it in and hit play. And it works. So when I zoom in, I already know the remaining steps. I identified the error in its bar and beat, the good note in its bar and beat, which was 4 bars later. Actually, I went with one that was 8 bars later. I selected and copied. I pasted the good notes over the bad. And now I need to add the crossfades before and after in the silent areas or before the transient. So when I look right here, I notice there's already a nice convenient little quiet space. So if I click and I try to drag this in, of course, grid mode stops me. It's going to try to snap to the grid. So I hold down what key? Command. I hold down the Command key and I put it right in that little silent spot. I'm going to come down to the bottom where I get my crossfade tool. I'm going to click and I go to drag, but I need to hold down the Command key again so that that fade is nice and small. I'm going to let go of my mouse first instead of my Command key. Watch what happens if I click and drag, but I let go of the Command key first. It's going to default and snap to that grid. So keep the Command key held down and let go of your mouse first. I'm going to scroll to the other side. Trim this, ideally to silence, or the closest thing I can find. Straight to the bottom, hold the Command key down, click the mouse, drag, let go of the mouse first, and let's listen to it. Click and select, pre-roll will play. Now let's listen back. And while it sounds good, the big thing is he really only screwed up these first couple of notes. So this first note was bad. When I say he screwed it up, I actually digitally created that after the fact. But what we can do, let's say we just want to keep these first good notes, but we like the old part of his second half. Well, that's pretty simple. Even after we've made these fades, I can come to this fade and I can just move this edit over to the middle, right after the bad notes, but keep his old good notes. So what do we need? Well, the piece of this original audio clip that's missing. So I can either hover over this until I get my trim tool, click with my trim tool, and you notice which direction it's pointing. It's pointing to the right. And I click and I can just trim this back. Now, he doesn't play quite the same notes in any of this, so I'd have to move it around a little bit to kind of find it. But let's see if we can just move this edit and find a spot where it sounds good. That doesn't work, but if I click and drag over here, it might work. Again, to avoid the grid mode, I'm going to hold down the Command key and try to pull it somewhere here in the middle. Now the inconsistency of his performance, you can see this note starts right on time, but this note starts early. I'm going to see if I can find a spot where it sounds good. And in fact, it does. And you notice, even though I'm using that trim tool, it kept my little fade here intact. If I zoom in, we see that fade was still there, fades out the end of the note without coming over the top. Now, if you just paste in that whole bar and leave it because technically the notes are okay, that's fine with me. For this class, for these purposes, that's okay. But the better you get, the more advanced you get at editing, that's going to be the direction you want to take. Is just trying to minimize those edits down to just what you need to fix and leave as much of their original performance as possible. So let's do one more of these here with this next section. We already know how to do this. We've established it's a 4-bar phrase that repeats. So bar 4, 5, 6, and 7. And in this case, bar 8 and 9 are still intact, but bar 10 and 11, the third and fourth bars of the phrase. Where can we get those? Well, we already know. If 10 and 11 are missing and it's 4 bars long, it's going to be the last 2 bars of the phrase. So from 10, we need to get it from bar 14 and bar 15. So we're going to use our keyboard. We're going to take this editing up a little bit more. I think you're going to like it. So if we've identified bar 10 as the missing bar, okay, then let's check over at bar 13 or bar 14. Sure enough. Cool. So we can go to bar 14 and zoom in and select, double check that I'm getting exactly bar 14 to bar 16, a 2-bar selection, copy with Command C. Let's jump back to bar 10 using our asterisk number pad, asterisk 10. Enter, it moves my playhead, and paste. Paste into place and just hit play to see if it's there. Seemed to work. Zoom in with my T key. Looks like this is already in place. Hold my Command key down. It's in that nice little spot. Holding Command, click, drag slightly, let go of my mouse first. That leaves a little fade. Scroll to the right till I find my edit. Ooh, here we have a special case because you can see if I hold the Command key down, his notes start at different times. Now, a bass guitar is one of the few instruments that has built-in silence a lot of times right between the notes. Depends on the genre, of course, and the song, but in this case, built-in silence. So this is one of the few times, as long as there's not sound sustaining across the edit, where we can actually just use a fade out and a fade in. So in this case, I'm going to hold that Command key down, and I'm going to come up and I'm going to make a fade out here. So I'm making this little fade out, and then I'm going to come to this side, and instead of cross-fading them together, I'm going to make a little fade in. I don't want to fade over the front of the note, but this is going to allow that bass to actually drop to silence and come back up. So if I hit play now, we can hear how it sounds. Now I felt just a little bit of a gap there, so I'm going to delete this. Let's zoom in just a little bit closer. I'm going to hold my Command key down and trim this little bit back and maybe trim this guy. Again, I'm just holding the Command key down to leave a little gap. Now that only really works on bass because the sound goes away and comes back, but when I listen, all right, and that's the right notes. I'm going to select it, color it purple, and throw away the excess ruler, or not the rulers, but the excess markers. All right, let's move on to the last one, and I'm going to show you one more technique. All right, so since we know how to do this with our mouse and we've started to integrate our keyboard, I'm going to zoom in here and let's find this third bass edit at 25. It sounds like he just kind of flubs the last phrase of the chords. So asterisk 25 to get there, spacebar to play. Like misses the last note. Now again, if we were trying to reconstruct this, as you get to advanced editing, we might go in and physically find the good notes and build a part out. But of course, that's not really the objective of engineering, but you want to just record good performances. But since we know bar 25 has the bad notes, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit and automatically look 4 bars earlier, since there's not really a lot of 4 bars later, or it actually changes the parts of the song. So if we're at bar 25, let's listen to it. Okay, and let's look 4 bars earlier, asterisk 2, 1. It's 4 bars earlier, enter play. And the end of that phrase might work. So how do we select that without using the mouse? Well, back at our Pro Tools keyboard that we started to look at earlier, the main counter button is complemented right here next to it with this enter start, end, and length marker. It's this slash on your number pad. So if I Command tab back over to Pro Tools, we'll see that when we hit that, We know the main counter button takes us here, but the slash right next to it, if I hit escape on this, the slash, you'll notice toggles through this start, end, and length marker. Go ahead and tap that a bunch of times. Just kind of get used to tapping that because it's going to speed your editing up dramatically and enable us to move through the rest of these edits very quickly without hardly using our mouse at all. So I'm going to slash my way through. And now that I've identified my bad notes at bar 25, right? We've identified a good potential notes at 21. Now we need to select and copy the good notes. Previously, we've been doing this with our mouse. But watch now. Asterisk 21 takes me here. But if I tap that slash key until it gets down to the length marker, or the length part, I can type in 1 bar, so 1, and hit enter. And what happens? It selects that 1 bar. So it's now made a selection of 1 length. I'm going to copy it using Command C, and let's jump back to bar 25. Command C to copy, asterisk 25, enter, and it puts me right in place, ready to paste. Command V. Since pre-roll is already turned on, all I have to do is hit play to listen. And the notes seem like they could fit. Again, for our purposes as an introduction to editing, we're looking for more for notes that fit. So I'm going to click here and let's just play it all the way over at one time. So while it sounds okay in that spot, we still need to fix our edits. I'm going to zoom in using the T key, zoom in just enough. I need to come to this, move my edit, holding down the Command key. Oh, I see the problem, because that actually starts a little early. Well, this is one of those times where we might want to move our edit around. So let me just try, I'm not holding the Command key, and see if I can find a better spot. Maybe here? Well, let's see. And that sounds actually okay. So I ended up having to move my edit using that trim tool and trimmed off that first note, which was okay. It was just the latter half of this phrase. So I'm going to zoom in, select this, zoom in on it, hold the Command key down, trim until I'm in this silence or transient, right before transient. Come straight to the bottom, holding the Command key, click and drag, scroll to the other side, hold the Command key down, try to trim until I find a spot. In this case, we've got this really random late note. Let's see if we can make that fit. Straight to the bottom, baby crossfade. Let's listen to it. And I'd say for our purposes now, and basic introduction to editing, this is going to work. Open up my color palette, change to clips and tracks, and color it purple. Bear claw down, Alt-A, and we've got all 3 of our base edits finished. And let's use those same techniques to quickly finish off the other edits in the song. All right, let's go ahead and turn back on all these other tracks for a second so we can start to establish what we need to finish. Bear claw down, Alt-A, and I've clicked and swiped to turn back on all our other tracks. And let's just kind of work our way through them piece by piece, because at this point, we start to get into a couple other use cases. So I see a hook guitar over here. I'm going to zoom in, and I know I've got these guitar hooks that I've seen, electric guitar hook 2. And let's listen to it and see if it stands out. We might need to come over and turn these little guys up. Again, we can go to the track, find that volume, little V, and I can click on it and turn it up. I also, if I made this a little taller, I could click to turn it up here. And I could also come to the little folder, not the little folder, the little fader. Wow, forgot that word. Little fader right here beside the output. If I click on that, I could also have a little floating fader to turn these up. Most of the time, I don't like extra windows floating around, so I just like to click on this and turn it up. And let's listen and see if we can identify what's wrong with these hook guitars. Aha, I hear the blink blink happening when I listen to this little riff. But we would need to see whether these are really, which one is actually broken, because we've got 2 different kind of a stereo recording of these hooks. So let's go over and solo them. We can use the solo button, and that will solo the track. That's obviously off, but is it on this one too? Let me solo it. So they both have the same error. Of course, we digitally created this. So sometimes if you have something that's gone wrong on 2 different tracks and they have a good part, we can actually copy and paste across 2 tracks. So if I'm listening to this part, I'm going to go ahead and solo them both out. You can either solo if you're in a certain solo mode. In this case, our options solo mode is set to either or, which I prefer. If you want to solo multiple ones, you have to hold down the shift key when you click solo on more tracks. So that'll let us hear both of them. Bada-bada-bum, blink, blink, bada-bada-bum. So I think that's supposed to be these two right here. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. And you know what? This is probably easier with the mouse. So even though, as I look here, I can see that he was so early, or whoever was playing this was so early, that if I tried to click and select, I notice I'm going to miss the front of their notes. Now the good news is, even though I'm clicking up here, so I've got my selector tool, and I'm clicking and dragging across, I can keep holding down and drag down, and it will select across both tracks. So I'm just going to copy that, Command-C, of course, and that's going to select those. And now I'm going to come over here and notice he was early on those notes as well. But again, just jumping directly to this, we already know how to do that. If I can look over and see that this is right here, I can click and select across and come down. And even though when I selected this and copied, I wasn't selecting the very first part of the note, when I paste, you notice it pastes them in. We're still going to be missing the note. Let's hear how it sounds. Hit play. So the notes are correct, but the front is missing. Simple enough. We know how to use our trim tool. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I want to hover with my trim tool facing this way so that when I trim, it trims back. I want to hold down the Command key and trim it to the left. And I'm going to just trim both of these to the left. And let's see how that sounds now. That does sound good. Let's listen to the whole phrase. Ba-na-na-bum. And that sounds good. I'm going to grab both of these, open up my color palette, clips and tracks, color it purple, and color the next one with my grabber purple. Now what about fades on this one? Well, typically, we're going to go through later and clean out and delete a bunch of stuff. But in this case, I always want to have a fade, same as always. I want to hold down my Command key and make the smallest fade. But when I look at this next part, there's going to be a whole lot of time until we get to this next one. I could make a fade for now, but ultimately, I'm not going to leave any of this junk. This could be potential noise. It could have coughs. If he's just sitting there in the studio waiting, there could be chair squeaks or bleed from other instruments. So I would actually end up coming through and deleting all of this. You could, of course, use your trim tool and just trim this all the way over to here. And then that's going to eliminate that. But we'll look more at using and cleaning up and trimming things here in just a little bit. All right, let's unsolo those, delete our hook guitar, and examine the next one, the acoustic guitar edit. So I've got a lot of tracks here. I'm going to go ahead and let's hide some of these excess ones since I know the electric or the acoustic guitar is what I'm looking for. I'm going to hide everything but the acoustic for a second, bear claw down, and let's, of course, go through the process of identifying the notes, or identifying the good and the bad. Let's solo an acoustic and listen. Can't hear it very well, so let's turn up its fader. Turn up its fader. I hear something wrong on the first bar of 8. Just that first couple of notes of the 8th bar, and let's solo the second acoustic and see if there's something there. And we notice it's the exact same problem. So you know what? Let's do it with our keyboard. I'm going to click and I'm going to select across both tracks. So hovering with my selector tool, select across both tracks. That way they're selected across both of them. Now we know already from earlier that we can find these good notes typically 4 bars earlier or 4 bars later. So let's try it 4 bars later. So that 4 bars after bar 8 would be bar 12. Asterisk 1, 2, enter, hit play. And it sounds correct. Let's use our number pad, the forward slash that we looked at right there in the corner. So I'm going to tap it now that I've got identified the good notes and the bad. Let's tap this slash key. And again, tap that until it toggles down to length. Just go ahead and tap that a few times. It's right beside the asterisk on your number pad. I'm going to type in 1 bar and enter. That will select that whole bar initially. I'm going to copy it with Command-C and jump back to bar 8, asterisk 8. enter. And then let's paste it in. As we zoom in now, let's solo both of them so I can hear. Hold down Shift and solo both. And when I hit play, sounds like the notes are correct. I'm going to zoom in and fix the front. Aha, I see it kind of happen in the middle of a chord. No problem. Command key held down. Use my trim tool. Make sure it's pointing this direction. I'm going to trim this back until I get the front of the chord straight to the bottom. I'm still holding my command key down. Click and trim and add in a little fade. Come down here, hold down the command key, trimming this one. A lot of people ask me whether they should be grouped. They should not. These are two different tracks, two different performances. So I'm going to trim this until I can find a spot, hopefully kind of in the silence or before the transient. Let go with my mouse, still holding the command key down so I get that slip mode. If I accidentally let go of the command key, I get these giant fades. So just hold the command key down, make as small a fade as you can. Click here with your selector tool and let's listen. Sounds pretty good. So the acoustic guitars are getting there. Scroll to the other side. Let's do the same. Hold the command key down, trim, hold the command key down, trim, go to the bottom, baby crossfade, bottom, baby crossfade. Let's listen to it. And let's unsolo them and listen. And they sound great. Let's start to mix them back in. We've got our acoustic guitars fixed. We're going to color them, clip purple, color the clip purple, and dispose. We're moving our way through, and we'll be done pretty quick. Let's move on to the electric guitar. All right, next is the electric guitar. I'm going to click to turn these on. Let's go figure out what is happening with this electric guitar edit. I don't know which one it's referring to, so I'm just going to click in here. Let's zoom in. Of course, I could just jump to bar 16 with an asterisk, 1/6, enter. And when I hit play, let's listen to it. Now, let's go and figure out which one it is. So I'm going to need to turn these electric guitars back up. And it looks like these are the only two playing, maybe this fill, but if I hit play, let's turn down the acoustics and turn up the electrics. I'm also going to pop over here and let's turn down that bass guitar wherever he's at. So find that bass, turn him down a little bit. And while I'm at it, let's go ahead and make sure that my master is up enough for me to hear. There we go. All right. So now when I'm listening to this and I hit play, I hear something in here definitely going wrong. Now I don't know which one it is, so let me solo this out and let's find it. Sounds like the entire bar of 16 on this electric guitar. And let's turn this one up so we can hear it. Oh, so that electric guitar is fine. It's just this electric guitar with this EGT JB cab. Fortunately, we know how to fix this, don't we? Clicked right here into number 16. And let's see if there's a better one. So 16 we could maybe find at 20. So asterisk 20, enter. Sure enough. So we've selected over at 20. Let's use our / key. Again, that's this one in the upper right hand corner of your number pad. Slash. It's going to move through our start, end, and length. / down to length. Let's select one bar. So an enter of 1 and enter. That selects this one bar. I'm going to copy, Command C. Let's jump back to bar 16, asterisk 1/6. Oops, not 1/4. Asterisk 1/6. Enter. Takes me right to the broken chord. Paste it in, Command V. Let's listen to it and see if it works. Sounds pretty good. I'm going to click here and just listen to the whole thing in context. Now, the notes are correct, but I can hear that if I zoom in, the front of the chord was missed. Simple solution. Let's zoom in on this. I'm going to hold with my trim. I need to trim it to either silence or somewhere before the transient. So I go to trim it earlier. Oops, I need to hold down my command key. I trim it earlier, and then I'm going to go straight to the bottom and see if I can add this crossfade. Let's click and listen. Okay, his performance is a little sloppy, but the chord comes in fine. I'm going to scroll to the other side, hold down the command key. Let's listen. And other than needing to trim this back into the left and add this little crossfade, let's see if that fixes it. Sounds perfect. Select it, open up, change our color to purple, and zoom out, delete the extra marker, and give it one more listen in context. Sounds great. All right, we're almost done. We are moving through these. I'm going to bear claw down Alt-A so we can see where we're at. I see we have one more, the fill guitar, that needs to be fixed right here, and let's fix that now. All right, the last one I see is this little fill guitar. Let's try to make the same adjustments. I'm going to hide some of these other tracks that I don't need, like this synth. It says fill guitar. I'm going to bear claw down and just leave a few tracks on my screen so that this is up closer to the top so you can see it. But let's hop over here. Somewhere is bar 20 is where we're seeing this. And let's give a listen to this fill guitar. Probably need to turn it up here with its volume and hit play and listen. If I turn this up enough to hear it, I can hear that something's going wacky. Let me go over here and bring this master down just a bit because I think we're clipping. And I can definitely hear something is amiss there. Now, with these fills, it looks like he's doing similar things over here. So I'm hovering above my waveform to click. Got a nice, cool little sound there, little riff. I can click over here. Clearly sharp on that. If I click over here, it's just a different part. So the good news is he plays this part several times in the song. That's a different one. Let's select and copy and paste this one. And let's take one slightly different approach to this. It's similar to what we saw with the hook guitars earlier. When we zoom in on this, on the bad one especially, we see that it doesn't, unlike the drums, it doesn't start nice and clean here on a even bar. It doesn't start on bar 20. It doesn't start on bar 19. In fact, it starts somewhere here about bar 19 and a half-ish. So, but here's the beauty of it. When I look at this, I can do this with either my mouse or with my number pad. Let's just do this one with the mouse, because what I see is both of these kind of go over a bar. See how this one goes over bar 20? And that means around bar 16, right? 4 bars earlier, we see the same sort of thing. So sometimes amateur editors will try to just select something and kind of eyeball it. They'll copy, they'll select somewhere, and they'll paste, and they won't get it quite right. So when you hit play, even if you pasted the right notes, it's kind of interesting, but it's really not what he's trying to do. Here's the simple approach. If you can find another spot where they play the same thing, find the nearest whole bar. Like in this case, it's bar 16 and bar 20, just like we would expect, right? So I'm going to come over to this one, select at bar 16, and just select the latter half of my phrase. Because when I'm selecting a chunk of audio like this in Pro Tools, copy, Command C, let's jump to bar 20, asterisk, to 0, enter, and paste it, Command V. And we think, well, it only pasted the latter half. But as we know, anytime we copy and paste any chunk of an audio clip, we actually have access to the entire audio clip now there. So if I hit play again, so it has the correct back half, but all I have to do is hover over this side, make sure my trim tool is pointing in the direction of the audio clip I want, and I can trim this back. And when I listen to that now, it's fixed it. Wonderful. Going to throw away that fill. Now, what about cleaning up the edits on things like this? Well, we're going to come back here in a little bit and look at cleaning up this session, because right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to add a crossfade here, since most of this stuff, this potential noise, if we zoom up on it, there could be noises, coughs, little sounds in here, and so we're going to want to ultimately get rid of that stuff. So I don't usually make crossfades. I'll usually go ahead and just delete this excess and have this start as a little fade in. So since I don't want any of that junk, I'm just going to fade this in. I'm going to come over here and do the same. Maybe click to delete all this stuff and add a little fade out, just to fade that out at the end. Color it purple as we know. Clips and tracks, purple. And there we go. I think we fixed all of those edits. Feeling pretty good. Let's turn on all these other tracks again. Bear claw down. And we'll come back around and look at our last thing, which will be copying and flying this hook to the end of the song. Now, the last thing it tells us to do in the instructions is we're going to come down here and do a very standard thing with our vocals. We're going to fly this chorus hook. So when we come back over here to the beginning, we do need to be able to hear it. So if you can't hear all of your tracks yet, just come over and let's turn on everything. Of course, all these unused tracks at the bottom we don't want. So I'm going to click and hold down my mouse while I swipe to hide everything below unused. Bear claw down, and there we are. Now, all these hook vocals, let's flip to our mix window and make sure that we can hear them. Because right now, if I hit play, they're pretty quiet. So I'm going to come over the edit window or the mix window and rebalance these a little bit so I can actually hear those hook vocals without being swamped by everything else. I don't need this overhead quite that loud. And let's scroll over and turn these guys up. Now, I'm just going to balance them initially here just a little bit louder. And what I want to do is I want to put them similar to the way we did the drums in a group, because even though they are not, they're not one instrument that's been mic'd multiple times, they are pretty much acting as one instrument. They're all kind of singing their parts in unison. So it'll just make it easier for editing purposes. So same as the drums, I'm going to click on the first track, hold down Shift before selecting the last one. So I was holding down nothing, clicked on the first one, held down Shift, Shift selected the last one, and group is Command G. Group would be Command G, and I'm going to call this hook. So this is the vocal hook. In fact, I'm just going to call it hook vox. And hit return to accept. And now all of these are going to act as one unit. So I can go ahead and use my trim tool to trim off the end over here, or of course I could simply select and trim back and delete. So now I have this one big hook. So when I zoom in, if I hit play, I'm going to turn off pre and post roll for just a second. Command K to turn off pre-roll. And things happen. So it says it needs to be copied and pasted to the end of the song over here somewhere. Now, how do we do that and where? Well, let's go ahead and use one last time all those keyboard shortcuts and techniques we just learned. It's very common when we're tracking vocals or background vocals to record them and have them stack and really try to nail one set of BGVs and then just copy and paste that to the other parts of the song. So in this case, though, it's kind of the same as the acoustic guitar, a couple of these guitar parts, because it doesn't start on a nice even downbeat. You can see it starts back here somewhere before bar 4, between bar 3. So when I hit play, I can hear that it starts, but it goes over the nearest whole bar is bar 4, where the downbeat happens of the music. You hear that? Boom. So boom. So I'm looking for those musical events that happen at all the points in the song that I need to copy and paste it to. So when I hit play, I find this downbeat here. Boom. And I see these little guitar parts happen. I see these synth parts happen. And let's go find the bar in the song where that occurs later. So I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to come over and let's zoom in maybe on bar here towards the end where I see these same sort of parts. You see these little electric guitar parts? There's the same sort of parts that happen over here at this point in the song. They happen over here. These synths happen here. They also happen here. So let's listen for that same musical downbeat, this ba-da-da-da-dump, bump, bump, and let's listen for it over here and find what bar it is. So the boom, bar 4, and let's click over here and see if we can find something similar. So So right there, did you hear it happen? It's that same downbeat. And when we look at these, it's the downbeat where all of these start, which happens to end up being what? Bar 26. If we listen to that again, you'll probably hear it. Gonna get ooh bum. Right on bar 26. Gonna get ooh bum. So there at bar 26 is where we see the common musical elements, as back here at bar 4, right? Common musical elements, these synths, these hook guitars, and that drum downbeat. So there's our simple solution. We're gonna come down to our group. I'm gonna use my mouse and click in here. It really doesn't matter where I click, because where I ultimately wanna go is where? Bar 4. So I'm gonna, once I've clicked inside this group at all, asterisk 4, enter. And what happens? It selects it right there. Now, I can use either my mouse and select from there, or I could use my / next to my asterisk, which will toggle me through the start, end, and length. I'm going to grab, let's go ahead and grab 2 bars, 2, enter, and that selects a chunk. Remember, it's only selecting the last half, but it's selecting from a known point, bar 4. I'm going to copy. I didn't even get the end of this, but again, that's okay. So I've copied any piece of this audio. Let's jump straight to bar what? Where was it at? Bar 26. So asterisk 26, enter, brings my playhead to right here, and I can paste it in, Command V. How do I get back the beginning and the end? Same as always. I'm just gonna trim this over till it lets the whole thing through and trim it back. Let's hear how that sounds. Pre-roll on and play. Works perfect. There you go. So we've now copied and pasted that, flown it, and if we had later courses, we could do the exact same thing. Figure out where their downbeat is, asterisk, jump straight to those, maybe 32 more bars in the future or whatever, and paste it in. So I'm going to hit Alt-A, bear claw down arrow, and Command-S to save, and we've just gone through and fixed and flown all of those 10 errors, and we're ready to move on with wrapping up this project. All right, back in our current instructions, the next thing it asks us to do, we fixed the 10 performance errors, we grouped the drums, we fixed the bass errors and the others, we recolored them purple, we grouped the high and the low hook vocals and flew them to the outro chorus, and now we need to clean the silence up from the audio tracks and apply some fades as well as a fade to the end of all tracks. So if we jump back over here to Pro Tools, there's a few ways that we look at this in class, and I just want to make sure that everybody's kind of learning them. When people talk about being quick at executing the ideas in their head, a lot of times all it means is they've practiced the muscle memory, right? If you're a guitar player and someone asks you to play a complicated chord, if you have to look it up or you have to think about it or you have to, take the time to manually do it, there's nothing wrong with that. It just means you're probably not operating at a professional level yet. But moreover, the longer it takes you to execute an idea, the greater the chance that idea slips out of your head and you lose that. So that's obviously not what we want. So let's look at the quickest ways to do this. When we're trying to clean up our tracks in a session, if I use this waveform zoom in the corner and I blow things up, we see there's stuff over here. So the way I tend to clean up a session is, well, one of a couple ways. Sometimes it's quicker if your mouse is already right near the edge of something to just use your trim tool to click and to trim. Now, if you've got a lot of tracks or things are really small, it can be difficult to get your mouse in the exact right spot to trim things off or even see. So of course you have to have your shortcuts like your bear claw and your Control Alt up and down arrow to resize. But sometimes if you just want to clean up the front of the audio, there's a couple good ways to approach this. One is I can simply hover with my mouse in my selector tool and click and select across multiple tracks. So trying to do it all with the trim tool is not wrong, but in that case it would take, look at how many different clicks this would take to be able to actually trim this off. Plus, there's the possibility, if you lose attention for even a moment, that when you go to get this selector tool, you accidentally end up getting the fade tool and you drag in a big fade. Undo that. Or you accidentally use the grabber tool and you move a whole piece of audio out of the way. So this is why, rather than even using all of these selection tools, I prefer to use the tools on that Pro Tools keyboard that we'll also talk about in class. And this is what I call the editor's home row. And what this does is it lets you trim the beginning and end of your clips using only a single key shortcut. It also lets you fade your clips using single key shortcuts, and it lets you move your edit selection up and down using single key shortcuts, using this P and this semicolon. So let's take a look at cleaning up this session using those. If I Command Tab back over to Pro Tools, in order for these single key shortcuts to work, we have to have this little A to Z button turned on. In fact, if I click it, it'll toggle it off. And let's see what happens when that is turned on here in the corner of our edit window, not in our clips window and not in our groups window, but here in our edit window. Then when we tap single key shortcuts on our keyboard, something will happen. So you'll notice if you look at the keyboard shortcuts at the bottom of the screen, what I hit there was the letter A. And A, if we look at this, is going to trim the start of the clip to our playhead. Do you see that there? So if I click and place my playhead here somewhere before my audio, hitting the A key will trim the beginning. If I undo Command Z, if I were to hit the S key, it trims the end of that audio clip back to the playhead. So the A key trims the beginning, the S key trims the next part, trims the end. So that's useful to know because now editing can be, especially if you're good with your mouse, you can simply click, hit the A key, click on your next track, hit the A key. And so any place you want to trim the beginning, I can click a little ways before the audio, give myself just a little pad there to add a fade later, and the A key will let me trim this off. So go through and practice trimming with the A key to trim off the front of any of this audio. Zoom out just a little ways, click here before the audio, leave myself a little bit of a gap, and just trim off all those fronts. That's a pretty quick way of cleaning up the front of your session. Let's scroll to the end and use the S key. If I scroll over here to the end, I see that there's excess unnecessary audio here. And notice the difference. Again, if I'm trying to quickly execute my ideas, if I'm trying to use this trim tool, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's possible to accidentally have the fade tool selected and draw a big fade, or to accidentally your mouse bumps down, it turns into the grabber tool, and you go dragging things off to the wrong place. That's why I like to simply place my tool, use the S key, and that will trim it off. So I click, trim, and S. Now there's one other thing we can integrate here, which if you get used to it will make things move even faster. And that's this move edit selection up and down with the P key to move your selection up, or the semicolon key to move it down. So when I'm back over here, we can see what happens. Place your playhead here on any track and hit the P key. What do you notice? Well, it moves that selection up and down. It doesn't move it earlier or later, it just moves it up and down. So P moves you up a track, semicolon moves you down. So for trimming the end of these, even if my hand wasn't near my mouse, I can get down to it, hit the S key to trim off the end, semicolon moves me down to the next, semicolon moves me down to the next, and S trims off the end. So I can, once I've got used to these, it becomes very simple to go through and just click and trim off the end with S, click and trim off the beginning with A. Now what about chunks here in the middle, something like this electric guitar fill? Well, again, sometimes it makes the most sense to simply select and delete that excess. That's okay too. Other times, for example, though, maybe with these little pieces, it might also make sense to simply select and drag across and delete. Another way to approach that, though, is to split these into their own clips and use A or S. So in this case, I might come in here and I want to use another single key shortcut, the B for blade, or for whatever reason they call it separate. Like that's an obvious mnemonic miss. So B for separate. I'm going to click in here and blade this with the B key, and what you see is now it has split that into two separate clips. So I blade, I click, and I blade again, and then if I click over here, I can hit the A key, which trimmed from the left edge of the clip, which is currently right there, up to my playhead with A. Now, one is not better than the other. Both are totally valid ways of working. In this case, if I'm doing a lot of them here in the middle, I might come through and just make a pass blading that into its own clip, click blading this into its own clip, clicking over here, A to trim, click, and A to trim. Now, some people would find that faster, But in this case, we've gone through and we've quickly eliminated all the significant chunks of excess silence in our track, and we're ready to add our fades. Gonna bear claw down and save, and let's jump on to adding fades. All right, let's add those fades now, and let's look at why. In this case, if we zoom in, maybe let's take, for example, these drums. If I make these a little taller, and I zoom in real close, we'll see why we want to add fades. If I just blow the waveforms up so you can see this, and again, this isn't actually changing the volume. This little guy is just a feature for Pro Tools that lets you increase the size of the waveform if you're editing really quiet things, so that you can see what's happening. And you can see this bass guitar has a big old chunk of noise here. And if we were to solo that, you might hear it or you might not right now. But once it's compressed and it goes on to mixing and mastering, then the radio, and it gets compressed and compressed and compressed again, those little sounds can get very audible. So we're always going to add a fade to our tracks. So I'm going to zoom back in here and let's go add fades. Now there's a couple ways to do it. And one is kind of the standard way. Again, with your mouse, if you hover over a corner and you go to click and drag, you'll notice because I'm in grid mode, what's it doing? Well, if I zoom in, either way, if I zoom in with the T key or Command right bracket, you see that it's faded over the front of the note. Well, just to show you what that would look like, let me hold the Command key down. If I trim even more, or I add this fade, make it even longer, do you see what's happening in the note? That kick drum is getting quieter and quieter because now it's in the middle of a fade up. So when we make our fades, we want our fades to always end before the note actually starts, before the transient. So we can just gently fade up into it, even if it's very short and quick, and then the music starts. So in this case, let me just take this fade and delete it. The better way, rather than going through and making individual fades on this, holding down the Command key so that they avoid grid mode, that could work, but you saw how many clicks that was. The better way is to use our fade tools to fade a lot of these tracks at once. So in this case, here's how I would do that. I would come in and instead of trying to hit one tiny little target in the corner, I'm going to click way out here. It doesn't even matter, just anywhere where my mouse wants to click. And as I'm moving along, I want to hold down that Command key so I'm back into slip mode. And as I get all the way over the front of these, I now have a selection made over the edge of the audio. And with that selection made, let's go back and look. What is the tool to fade a selection? In that case, it's F. So we'll look at D and G in a second, but in this case, it's F. So a lot of times making that selection and boom, F is going to fade across every one of those at once. And really, this is about the only tool you need to do this. Click anywhere out in the open spaces, hold Command so you can pull it right up before that note actually starts, and F. This is usually by far the fastest way to do it. Look, I can even fade all these at once. Click here anywhere in the empty space, hold the Command key down so I can pull right up before the audio starts. I've got a bunch of little selections, and F. So that's really the fastest way to go through this. Hold Command key down until I get up to the edge of the audio, F. Hold the Command key down, select up to the edge of the audio, and you'll start to notice just how easy this is. Hold Command key, click and drag, and I always want, if I'm fading in, my fade should end before the note starts, F. And if I'm fading out, typically I'll start around when the note ends, although it is possible on occasion, especially if you're trying to make several notes end at the same time, sometimes if they're fading away naturally, you can just make those fades you can actually help the notes to sound like they end at the same time by fading them out and fading over that. Since things naturally die off volume-wise over time, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I like to just scroll through my session, hold that Command key down, select across, and hit F. That's just the fastest way to do fades most of the time. The other options are to use these A or D and G keys, fade from the start to the playhead or fade from the end. Let me show you a time when that might work. So for example, if I'm looking at this one right here, and I want it to fade from here to the end, if instead of making a selection, if I just place the playhead, this D and G key will fade to the end or from the beginning. So the D key, for example, fades from the left edge of the clip to my playhead. Obviously not what I want. The G key fades from the playhead out. So that's going to fade that out. Sometimes that's better. I find most of the time I just prefer to click and select while holding that command key down and hit F. One is not right, one is not wrong, but usually this selection F method goes through and it makes it very quick to fade a whole bunch of tracks at once. And in fact, you can even come across multiple tracks that, as long as you're only getting the edges, for example, I could fade all of these at once. Click, drag across all of them, hold the command key down so that it comes right up before, and now a single F will fade across all of those. So that's a quick way to go through and add these fades to our track. So I'm just going to kind of continue to scroll through, and you go through and add your fades, and then let's come back and use these tools one more time to add this fade to the very end. Okay, so adding this 2-bar fade to the very end, there's a couple of ways we want to approach this, and just making sure that you know how to do it. So when we're going to add this 2-bar fade, we can look over and see right now that the song is ending at bar 31 for me. So at bar 31, at bar 31, we've got, we can tell that our song should fade from bar 29 to the end. So again, when people haven't learned their shortcuts, they would tend to come and use this hover method over the corner to get the fade and drag it back. And that's fine if no other way is working, except it'll take a long time, especially if you have more tracks than this. This is a very small session. The better way, of course, you could simply click out here in the wide open spaces, drag back and across and down all of these separate edits, and add a fade with F. So that would also work. It fades for the last 2 bars of the song. Sometimes that might not work for reasons, in which case simply clicking at bar 29 in the bars and beats ruler places the playhead across all of the tracks. And as we've looked at this, we know that fading from the playhead to the end of the audio clips is done with G. And G will fade that out. Now I do want to point out a couple things here. Once I'm just go ahead and fade it. So we've got a fade. Fades are very similar to audio in general in Pro Tools in that you can hover over them, you can select a chunk, and if you delete it, it'll just make a shorter fade. If you hover over the bottom and click on it, it will let you drag that fade around if you just want it to fade earlier. If you hover over the edge of it, and face it this way, face your trim tool this way, you can click and drag and trim the fade until it is longer. Now, of course, we only need 2 bars here, but I just want to show you that. And if you want to change the shape, hover over it with your grabber tool, double click, and then you can change the shape. If you wanted it to last longer and then suddenly fade out at the end, or if you wanted it to fade really quickly, but then last a long time. I'm just going to leave it on this linear fade for now, but it really doesn't matter in our situation right now, as long as it's fading out in the way you want. Let's listen. And let's unsolo our bass. All right, so we've added a 2-bar fade to the end of our tracks. So now it's time to move on to this last step here in the video for setting up our groups, deleting old memory locations. So we've already learned how to make groups. It says we're going to group our acoustic guitars as well. I'm going to come over to my acoustics. All of my tracks are selected, so I will hold the Alt key and click on a name to deselect them. Select one acoustic, hold down Shift, and select the next one. Group with Command G, acoustic. And I need my BGVs as well, so I'm going to find my BGVs here, my background vocals. Hold down Shift, group with BGVs. And I've got all my groups down here. Delete old memory locations and create song locations. Well, we've deleted all of the old memory locations. I'm going to bear claw down arrow and Alt-A. Rewind to the beginning with return. And in order to make new song locations, we're going to use on our number pad over here the create memory locations, which is Enter. And just to be clear, Enter on your number pad is a different key from return on your keyboard. So we're going to use the Enter key, and we can even do that while it's playing. So we need to make a memory location for the intro, the hook, verse 1, chorus 1, and hook 2. So back to Pro Tools. When I hit play, here comes our intro, Enter key, and it brings up this memory location. Intro, enter again, hook, enter again. Here comes verse 1, enter on the number pad, V1, enter to save it, and you see the new memory locations going up here. Here comes the chorus. 3, 1, 2, 3. 3, and boom. Chorus 1, and we're coming over to the hook. Gonna jump it in. Gonna get hook 2. So by hitting enter, I've now added those in. The last thing we're going to do is renumber our bars and import our session data. So right now our song starts this way. The Pro Tools session will default to starting at bar 1. Unfortunately, the music doesn't start until bar 2. It's very common to hit record and have the band or musicians take a minute or a couple of bars to start recording. So what we want to do is simply renumber these bars so that the bars of Pro Tools line up with the bars of the song. So the simple solution to that is to simply always look at where the music is starting. And in this case, we see that happen at bar 2. So when you hear that, wherever that starts in your song, if the whole song started at bar 3, we would do it that way. But for right now, it starts at bar 2. So I'm going to go and choose an event menu, which controls all the time, tempo, and event operations, MIDI operations. I'm going to renumber my bars and renumber it so that bar 2 becomes bar 1. I want to choose renumber. You'll see that now my session will start at bar 0, or sometimes if there's a bigger gap before the music starts, your session might even start at negative bars. But now my Pro Tools session will start at bar 1, or my song will start at bar 1, and the bars will line up with Pro Tools. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. Beautiful. All right, let's come back in just a second and look at importing our session data. The last step in our instructions, I'm going to hit Alt-A and bear claw down arrow so everything zooms out. Notice that I've missed a couple of my fades here, so I'm going to add those last little guys in. And a little baby fade, little baby fade. I think I've got them all, but now we're going to import our session data. I'm going to flip to the mix window just so you can see what happens here. When I hit play, let me just click randomly here in the middle of the song and jump to bar 16. When I hit play, you see that the tracks are not panned, so the pan knob is not left or right anywhere. The faders have been turned up and down so we can adjust the mix. But when we're doing this project, it says we want to import the session data. And what that lets us do is actually import things like plugins, faders, pan, all sorts of things from another Pro Tools session. And we did that with a file, import, session data. So file, import, and session data. And it's going to say, well, what session do you want to import stuff from? So I'm going to go to wherever my external hard drive is, and wherever that initial folder was, I'm going to view it in detail view and look for that mix template for exercise 1. That mix template, if you were to open it up by itself, has no audio in it. But what it was is I've mixed a song that's very similar, and we're going to import the volume, the pan, automation and settings, the plugins, and their settings onto this track. So when I choose my mix template and open, it's going to say, okay, the source I'm importing from this Pro Tools session called mix template, which has its faders and pans and plugins. And it says, well, the source session has a track named kick out. Which track do you want to import those plugins and volume onto? Well, what do I want? I want to import it onto my kick track, right? Well, how about the snare top? I want to import these settings from the source session, my mix template, onto my snare top. Makes sense. Now, the faster way to do this, rather than doing it one at a time, if we're trying to do a whole session like this, is to simply hit match tracks. And when you do that, it will attempt to match them by name. And you notice these are not even the same names, but it's doing a decent job of importing those onto the correct tracks. Lead vocals, background vocals, and high and low hook. And it's even importing some of these others. Now I could turn off everything if I wanted, or you can leave those on. You can just hit match tracks. Since those are inactive anyway, it's not going to affect anything. Now the playlist option says, do you want to import and replace the existing playlists? The playlists are the audio. So I don't want to replace all that audio I just took the time to clean up and to edit. So I do not want to import the playlist. And finally, it's going to say, well, what track data do you want to import? Newer versions of Pro Tools, instead of giving you a drop-down list here, will bring it up as a box. I want to choose none or deselect all of those things so I don't accidentally bring in alternate playlists and a bunch of extra things about the tracks that I don't need. In fact, the only things I need, it says, are the volume, pan, the main volume and main pan, plugin assignments and settings. So I'm going to turn off everything else and import just my main volume, my main pan automation, my main plugin assignments, and my main plugin settings. So if yours looks a little different, a box with checks, that's fine too. You can probably Alt-click to turn them all off, or just manually turn them all off and turn on only the things you want. And now watch what happens. When we click OK, 1, 2, 3, it imports all the plugins, rearranges the faders, and rearranges the pan. And you can hear the mix is completely different as well. And in this case, for grading purposes, I've even had it turn down the vocal track so that I no longer have to hear the vocals competing. But when I hit play, I simply rebalance to these levels so that I can hear the errors. So when you hit play here, I've got the electric guitar up a little bit so that if you fix that, hopefully I can hear it. Same with the drums, etc. So I've just built this mix so that it'll make it to where I can grade it and hear your work. The last things in the instructions are to go through and we're going to remove unused files from our disk before uploading. So over here in the clips window, we've got a bunch of extra files. If I click on any of these audio tracks or audio clips, you'll see it shows you where it's actually at on your hard drive. See this file selected? Once I selected it, it says that's in your hard drive in the session files in the audio files folder, or in the session folder. So, but what I can do is go to my clips window and choose to select the unused files. So unused files can also be selected with the shortcut Shift-Command-U. So Shift-Command-U is going to select any old clips, maybe I copied and pasted things, but basically it's only going to select files that do not appear in a track. Do not appear in a track. Maybe an old take that's no longer on a track anywhere. So by selecting those, I'm now going to clear them. So Shift-Command-U, and to clear them with Shift-Command-B. So when I hit Shift-Command-B, it might say something like, do you want to clear the clips? Do you want to remove them? And if I say yes, it might see something like this. Well, it says it's used in a track, a plugin, the undo cue, or in the clipboard. Well, thanks for being specific, Avid. Do you still want to clear it? The short answer is, if I hit Shift-Command-U, then it only selected files that are unused. What probably happened is I've copied something, Command-C, somewhere to my clipboard, and I haven't pasted it yet. So in which case, I'm still always going to say, yes, clear those out. So I'm going to save my work. I'm going to bear claw down. I'm going to Alt-A and make sure that this is all fitted on my screen. Double checking all of my checklist, making sure I haven't missed any fades. We'll review this in class, but I want to make sure all of my work is good. I'm going to go and check this. I'm going to make sure that I can hear everything. And if it all looks good, I'm ready to save and upload. I like to do this though. I like to reopen my current session. File, open recent, and you'll see right now the file I'm using is for my Monday, Wednesday, 9 o'clock class. But the shortcut to reopen the most recent session, which also happens to be the one open now, is Shift-Command-O. So let's try that. Shift-Command-O. It closes and reopens. So that way I can make sure nothing accidentally gets turned off or is changed. And once that's good, I'm ready to close my session. So let's go ahead and close our session. I'm going to go to the File menu and make sure I know the shortcut. Shift-Command-W will close the session. Shift-Command-W closes it out. If it's not saved, it's going to ask me to. I'm going to hit Enter to save that. Yes, Command-S. And then I want to go look in my hard drive and find this folder with my file. So when I see that, I can see that this is now saved. It was last saved just minutes ago at 11:24. So that's the file that I'm ready to upload. Of course, I've only got multiple Pro Tools sessions in here because I'm teaching multiple classes. But if I was going to upload onto Schoology, I can see that this is the PTX file that I'm ready to upload. I've really enjoyed teaching you this. I look forward to seeing you in class and working with you outside of class. If you have any questions, come by and see me or drop me an email. We'll see you in class.